Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We are standing up for a voting system that we deserve, that we can have confidence in, that has integrity and security, and that we know is not subject to tampering, malfeasance, hacking, and so on. So we're standing up to say that we deserve that in this election, and actually in every election.
Inside the recount, today we speak with former Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, who's pushing for recounts in 3 states: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Donald Trump's narrow victories in the states secured his election, but could a recount put Hillary Clinton into the White House? We'll also speak with cybersecurity and privacy researcher Bruce Schneier on why our voting system is vulnerable to hackers. And we'll talk to Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig in Amsterdam on the Electoral College and why he feels the electors should choose Clinton over Trump. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President-elect Donald Trump has announced a handful of new cabinet picks. On Tuesday, he named billionaire Steven Mnuchin to be Treasury Secretary. Mnuchin has deep ties on Wall Street, including working as a partner for Goldman Sachs, where his father also worked. Mnuchin's hedge fund also played a role in the housing crisis after it scooped up the failing California bank IndyMac in 2008. Under Mnuchin's ownership, IndyMac foreclosed on 36,000 families, particularly elderly residents trapped in reverse mortgages. Mnuchin was accused of running a foreclosure machine. The bank, which was renamed One West, was also accused of racially discriminatory lending practices. In 2015, Mnuchin sold the bank for $3.4 billion, $1.8 billion more than he bought it for. Trump's also reportedly picked billionaire private equity investor Wilbur Ross to be Commerce Secretary. Ross specializes in flipping bankrupt companies for profit, often buying the U.S. companies at low prices, then selling them to overseas investors. He and his companies have sometimes shipped jobs in factories overseas, practices Donald Trump has railed against. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has picked George W. Bush's former Labor Secretary, Elaine Chao, to be Transportation Secretary. Chao's the wife of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky and immigrated to the United States from Taiwan when she was 8 years old. She's been a fixture in Washington, D.C. for more than 20 years. Trump also named Seema Verma to be Administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Verma has worked closely with Vice President-elect Mike Pence, and her health policy firm helped design Indiana's Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Trump has still not announced his pick for Secretary of State, although he did dine with former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney Tuesday night in New York City. Other possible candidates for Secretary of State include former New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, retired General David Petraeus, and former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton. Donald Trump also sparked controversy Tuesday when he made 2 unconstitutional proposals in a single tweet, writing, quote, "Nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or year in jail," unquote. The Supreme Court has ruled twice that flag burning is protected under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has also ruled it's unconstitutional to strip people of citizenship for most crimes, including desertion. In a 1958 ruling, Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren wrote, quote, "The deprivation of citizenship is not a weapon that the government may use to express its displeasure at a citizen's conduct, however reprehensible that conduct may be," unquote. Thousands of fast food workers, home care and child care providers, janitors, airport workers, and Uber drivers rallied in 340 cities across the United States Tuesday for a national day of action to demand a minimum wage of $15 an hour. In New York City, about 24 people were arrested. This is Hector Figueroa, president of 32BJ Service Employees International Union.
After the outcome of this last election, it's even more important that we raise our voices and we fight for our rights. It was economics. It was the rising income inequality that is striking hard on workers that led to a very, very complicated election. And unless we address this problem, we are going to see our country suffer. So we're here to say the time to give workers a raise is now. The time to win a union in the workplace is now. And we're not going to stop until we win 15 and a union.
In Texas, journalist and activist Barrett Brown has been released from federal prison after spending 4 years behind bars on charges related to the hacking of the private intelligence firm Stratfor, which exposed how the firm spied on activists on behalf of corporations. In 2014, he pled guilty to charges of transmitting threats, accessory to a cyber attack, and obstruction of justice. Supporters say Brown has been unfairly targeted for investigating the highly secretive world of private intelligence and military contractors. At one point, Barrett Brown faced 100 years in prison before pleading guilty to lesser charges. Earlier this year, Brown won the National Magazine Award for prison columns for a series of columns he wrote for The Intercept. In Kashmir, Indian officials say independence rebels attacked an Indian Army base Tuesday, killing at least 7 Indian soldiers. Officials say at least 3 Kashmiri rebels were killed during the attack. The disputed territory has been rocked by protests since July, when Indian security forces killed a prominent Kashmiri independence leader. At least 80 Kashmiris have been killed by Indian security forces during the ongoing protests. In Brazil, up to 10,000 people protested Tuesday against austerity ahead of a Senate vote in which lawmakers approved measures to impose a strict cap on federal spending. Leftist opposition lawmakers say the legislation will destroy education and health programs. The vote to approve the constitutional amendments a victory for Brazilian President Michel Temer, who took power after the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, in a process she and others have called a coup. A group of women from the Caravan of Central American Mothers of Missing Migrants are traversing Mexico in search of their children who went missing as they attempted to cross the country to reach the United States. The International Crisis Group says tens of thousands of Central American migrants fleeing violence in their home countries go missing each year in Mexico. Caravan organizers say they found at least 265 missing children over the 12 years they've been organizing the caravan. This is Anita Zelaya from El Salvador, who's been looking for her son since 2002.
I am hopeful that I am going to find my son alive. There is so much injustice, and I, as a mother, am not okay with the fact that our children are massacred and victims of all that happens to them on the journey. I do not agree. We know that sadly Mexico, as the name of the caravan shows, is looking for life in paths of death. It is a journey of kidnappings, a route of muggings, a route of rape, and sadly, a route of extortions. Unfortunately, our children are still disappeared.
In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has approved 2 major pipelines, the Kinder Morgan's $5 billion Trans Mountain Pipeline and the $7.5 billion Enbridge Line 3 pipeline. The Trans Mountain Pipeline would carry oil from the Alberta tar sands to a port in Vancouver. The Enbridge Line 3 pipeline would carry tar sands oil from Alberta across the U.S.-Canadian border to a terminal in Superior, Wisconsin. Both pipelines face massive resistance from Canadian First Nations, who held a ceremony Tuesday in which more nations signed on to a treaty declaring they'll fight all new tar sands infrastructure. 112 Canadian First Nations and some U.S. Native American tribes have now signed the continent-wide treaty alliance against tar sands expansion, including the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota and the White Earth Nation in Minnesota. In Washington, D.C., former Vice President Al Gore has spoken out against another pipeline, the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline, while speaking at the New York Times Global Leaders Collective Conference.
The massive investment in these pipeline infrastructure projects will be amortized over 50 to 75 years, and we need that capital to flow into renewables. This Standing Rock project is an atrocity. It is an absolute atrocity. And I wish that President Obama would step in to before there's more violence out there against those, they call themselves water protectors. This is an embarrassment to our country. All those promises have been broken for so long, using water cannons in sub-freezing temperatures. That's inhumane.
This comes as the coral of Australia's Great Barrier Reef has experienced its worst die-off on record as a result of warmer ocean water due to climate change. Scientists say bleaching has killed two-thirds of the coral on the 430-mile northern stretch in only 9 months. This is Terry Hughes of the Australian Research Council.
Well, we've seen now 3 bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. The first one was in 1998, the second in 2002, and the third one this most recent summer in 2016. This one is by far the most extreme. And we've seen 3 of these events now with just 1 degree of global warming. So 2 degrees of global warming, which is the international target, is going to be a very challenging place for the Great Barrier Reef.
In Tennessee, at least 3 people have died and hundreds of homes were destroyed after a wildfire tore through resort towns near the Great Smoky Mountains. As many as 14,000 people fled Monday and Tuesday as 90-mile-per-hour wind gusts pushed the fires into the towns. This is the mayor of Sevier County, Larry Waters.
We continue to learn devastating news about the magnitude of the losses that we're experiencing as a community in Sevier County. I have now been able to confirm the loss of 3 lives in Sevier County. We're deeply saddened by these losses, and we extend our prayers to the families of all of them. We do not have information to release at this time regarding identities, as we are awaiting notification of next of kin.
This comes as early this morning a tornado killed 3 people after it tore through a mobile home park in Alabama and critically injured 4 children after hitting a daycare center. In South Carolina, judges permitting Dylan Roof to represent himself at his own trial, which opened Monday in Charleston. Prosecutors say Roof opened fire at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina in June 2015, killing 9 black worshipers, including the pastor, Clement Pinckney. Roof is pleading not guilty. He embraced white supremacist views and was shown in photographs posing with the Confederate flag and a pistol. In Arizona, a 36-year-old Guatemalan woman has died in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement after she suffered a series of seizures while being detained at the Eloy Detention Center. Raquel Hidalgo had been held at Eloy since November 13th after U.S. Border Patrol agents captured her as she tried to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. Hidalgo died after being rushed to a nearby hospital Sunday. At least 15 people have died while confined at the for-profit Eloy Detention Center since 2003, which is run by Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, which recently changed its name to Core Civic. And former Black Panther Sundiata Acoli has been denied release by the New Jersey State Parole Board after more than 40 years in prison. He first became eligible for parole in 1992 and turns 80 years old in January. Acoli was convicted of killing a state trooper during a 1973 shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike, along with fellow Panthers Zaid Malik Shakur, who was also killed, and Assata Shakur, who has said she was shot by police while she had both her arms in the air. Assata Shakur later escaped to Cuba, where she has political asylum. Acoli is one of at least 15 former members of the Black Panther Party who are still in prison. His lawyers plan to appeal the decision. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Former presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein is continuing her efforts to force recounts in 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. But on Tuesday, the effort faced a setback as a Wisconsin judge refused to order a statewide hand recount. Instead, the judge ruled that each of the state's 72 county clerks can decide on their own how to carry out the recount. Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin by less than 30,000 votes out of 2.8 million cast. The result was even closer in Michigan, where Trump won by just 12,000 votes. Dr. Stein is expected to file paperwork in Michigan by today's deadline, requesting a recount there. More than 130,000 people have donated more than $6.5 million to Stein's efforts. That's nearly double how much Stein raised during her presidential effort. Trump has dismissed the recount efforts. In a statement, he said, "This is a scam by the Green Party for an election that has already been conceded, and the results of this election should be respected instead of being challenged and abused," which is exactly what Jill Stein is doing, he said. However, in another tweet, Trump did claim that millions of people illegally voted in the November 8th election. In a tweet sent out on Sunday, Trump wrote, "In addition to winning the Electoral College in a landslide, I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally," unquote. He offered no evidence to back up his claim. While Donald Trump did win the Electoral College, Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton's lead in the popular vote has now reached well over 2 million and is expected to grow to 2.5 million. To talk more about the recount efforts, we're joined by former Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein. She's joining us from Boston. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Jill. Talk about your recount efforts, why you've decided to go this route.
Great. Thank you, and good to be with you this morning, Amy. You know, coming out of this very divisive and bitter and painful election, you know, confidence of Americans in our voting system, in our election system, our political system, really across the board, confidence in American institutions is really at rock bottom low. According to a New York Times poll, 80% of Americans, more than 80%, said they were disgusted by the election. It's really important that we be able to improve our election system and our political system as a base, a point of departure for improving all the other things that are melting down around us, our healthcare system, our jobs, our climate, the endless wars that are making us less secure, and so on. We need to start by verifying our votes and ensuring that this is a democracy that we can work with. Donald Trump himself said that it was a rigged election in ways that he probably didn't understand, but there was enormous resonance with what he said about it being a rigged election. When Bernie Sanders talked about it being a rigged economy, there was enormous resonance with that. This isn't something we can just walk away and sweep under the rug. And remember, in this election, most people were voting against the candidate that they liked the least or that they were most afraid of, rather than for their values or for their vision of a better future. So I think there's widespread soul-searching and discontent about this election we've come out of, and I think it's a really positive step that people have decided this is where we're going to start by ensuring that we can have confidence in the vote count. This is not about attempting to help one candidate or hurt another candidate. This is about helping voters restore confidence that we are properly and securely recording the votes and counting them. And we know that these voting machines are subject to machine error, human error, hacking, tampering, you name it. These machines, when they're looked into, produce all kinds of problems, and you can't know unless you look.
Can you respond to the Wisconsin judge and what this means, handing it off to the local voting precincts?
What the judge said was that hand counted would be the gold standard, and that was the best way to restore confidence in the vote. But he, I'm told, is a second hand. What I understand is that he acknowledged that the Wisconsin law didn't enable him to order that. So he gave it, shall we say, moral authority to do the hand counts, but felt he could not actually order the hand counts. So it will be up to the county clerks and the county election departments, and we'll be working with them and encouraging them to do the right thing. Now, the good news is in the state of Michigan, where we're formally filing today, we've already had an informal heads up that they expect to go forward with a statewide hand count.
And are you going to be moving forward on Michigan today?
Yes, we are. We will be filing, paying the filing fee, and moving forward. Another very difficult challenge to the campaign is that the state of Wisconsin raised the cost. It was going to be $1.1 million, and then the night before last, we learned it's actually going to be $3.5 million, which I think just underscores that there's something wrong with this picture. Not only that our votes are being recorded on machines that are wide open, an invitation to tampering, to human and machine error, not only that our votes are not being properly safeguarded, but that in addition, if we want to have reassurance, if we want to verify the vote, we, the citizens, have to raise millions of dollars in order to scrutinize the vote, in order to have assurance. And add to that that there's, enormous bureaucratic hurdles to doing this. So, part of our intent here is not only to reassure the American people that we can have confidence in this vote, or to find problems if there are problems, as the system is extremely vulnerable to. But we want to move forward and build this movement for verified voting, for election integrity, which was really born out of the 2004 recount. For example, in 2004, the city of Toledo, largely the communities of color, filed for a recount because they felt like their votes were not being properly counted and respected. And what they found in that case, when they did a hand recount, was 90,000 votes that had not been counted simply because the voting counting machines, so-called optical scanners, had been miscalibrated. So they were not quite at the proper angle that they could actually see the vote and count the vote. There are innumerable cases where when we look, we find problems. So it's really important to look, but it's also really important for us to change the way that we do this and to get rid of these electronic voting machines, which are an invitation to trouble.
We're going to be
speaking
speaking with Bruce Schneier in a moment about hacking. New York Magazine said in Wisconsin, Hillary Clinton received 7% fewer votes in counties that relied on electronic voting machines compared with counties that used optical scanners and paper ballots. But I wanted to ask you about a petition posted on the website of Margaret Flowers, the former Maryland Green Party candidate for Senate. The petition is titled, "Greens Speak Out on Recount and Our Commitment to an Independent Party." It says in part, the decision to pursue a recount was not made in a democratic or a strategic way, nor did it respect the established decision-making processes and structures of the Green Party of the United States. This recount does not address the disenfranchisement of voters. It recounts votes that were already counted rather than restoring the suffrage of voters who were prevented from voting. The petition was signed by several prominent Green Party members and supporters, including Margaret Flowers, your former advisor Kevin Zeese, former Green Party vice presidential candidate Rosa Clemente, and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges. Jill, your running mate, Jamu Baraka, did not sign the petition, but has also come out against the recount. Can you respond to this criticism?
Yes. The Green Party has many things to do, and many people are not enthusiastic about verified voting, about election integrity. The Green Party has a broad set of commitments, including continuing the momentum and the grassroots organizing that came out of the campaign. And I'm actually very grateful that many people are continuing to do that and that that is their priority. I myself had great ambivalence about moving forward with this. In 2006, I ran for Secretary of State here in my home state in Massachusetts. So I have a long-standing commitment to voting integrity. And it's not just counting votes and getting rid of these very problematic voting machines. It's also ensuring that every American has a constitutional right to vote. And Donald Trump said the opposite of what has happened. The problem is not that people were voting illegally, but rather that people were stripped from the voter rolls through things like interstate cross-check, also through the use of voter ID. Now, that's not addressed in this case, but this case is a launching pad for a broader agenda that includes ensuring that we have a democratic right to vote, a constitutional right to vote, ensuring that we have open debates so that voters can actually be informed and empowered to make wise choices. And another priority is to ending fear-based voting through ranked choice voting, like the state of Maine just passed, which means you can go into the voting booth and rank your choices, knowing that your first choice will be, if it loses, your vote will be reassigned to your second choice. This is part of a critical voting agenda, as well as getting rid of the Electoral College. So there are many things that need to be done. This is a point of departure which actually allows us Greens to lead the way forward on a critical and immediate need.
So, Dr. Jill Stein, some of the criticism of people even within your own party, though you have the right as a presidential candidate to ask for this on your own, has been that you're only choosing states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, where Hillary Clinton lost, not close states where she won. And they're saying you're serving the very party that you were so fiercely critical of during the campaign. And
I remain fiercely critical of that party.
They are joining you in this, is that right, in supporting your call for a recount?
Not in any coordinated way. We stepped up to the plate because they had not. They did not express their support until the deadline had passed for filing in Wisconsin. Our lawyers are communicating so that they do not legally get in each other's way, but we are otherwise not coordinating. And as I say, I've been committed to this issue for many years. So for me, this is kind of like breathing. It was something that would have been virtually impossible for me not to do. Throughout the campaign, when I was asked whether I would stand up and call for a recount if there was cause to be concerned about the reliability and the credibility of the vote, I always said, yes, I would. And it had nothing to do with who won. And you may recall that Michigan did not actually, was not decided as a Trump state until we had already announced that we would be launching a recount in Michigan. It could have gone to Hillary Clinton, and we would have still challenged
What about those who are saying you're using this as a fundraising device? You've raised almost double, and I also want to ask if this has surprised you, than you raised in your entire campaign for this recount, and that ultimately you may use these for local Green Party candidates, some have criticized.
No, you can't do that. Right, no, this is, FEC rules require that a recount be funded by a dedicated recount account, and the money can only be used for that. So it'd be great to have access to that money, but we don't have access to that money. And since Wisconsin raised the price tag on us, there's no way that there will be residual money. This is all going into the recount.
On Monday,
and it's funded by small donors. You know, this is a grassroots movement all across America, 140,000. Yes, I was absolutely flabbergasted because we launched this the day before Thanksgiving. Who in their right mind was going to be paying attention to, you know, the call for a recount and fundraising over the Thanksgiving weekend? But that's exactly what happened, because people are starving for something positive to do to actually begin to take back this promise of democracy.
Is it all small donors?
Yes, it is, because we are following campaign finance laws, like as if for our campaign. So the average donation is $45. 0.5% of donors contributed more than $1,000, and the absolute maximum is the maximum you can contribute to a political campaign, which is $2,700.
On Monday,
so there is no deep account here for deep pockets.
Monday night, I was at the Free Library in Philadelphia interviewing Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and I asked him about your recount effort.
I think what most people expect is not much will happen, but we will see. But it touches on, so in other words, all that they are doing is what happens all of the time. Nothing new about that. Recounts take place when I was elected mayor. There was a recount. Right now in North Carolina, the Republican governor, who appears to be losing, wants a recount. Not a new idea. But I'll tell you what it touches on. Why it is touching a nerve is not because I believe that it's going to reverse the results. I don't think that's the case. But this is what. people, especially with all of this barrage of attacks on websites and so forth, are really wondering whether when they vote, is their vote legitimate? You know, and there's talk, have the Russians interfered in this thing? So that's what it will deal, which takes us to another issue. And I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but I will say it tonight. I was researching this. You know, in Canada, they still do their voting with paper ballots. And maybe it takes an extra hour or two to get the results out to the media, but they manage to survive. And I kind of think we should go back to paper ballots, lock them up. But I think what this suit is about is touching on that issue and trying to see if the results end up being significantly different than what we were announced on election night.
That's Bernie Sanders on Monday night. Jill Stein, your response.
He's absolutely right, and this should be built into our election system, that we should not be voting on these very tamper-friendly, error-prone machines in the first place. We should be voting on paper ballots that can be counted by these optical scanners, but they have to be checked with automatic audits. This should be, you know, built-in reassurance that should be part of our voting system. And whenever races are very close, there should be an automatic recount. And when there is suggestions of foul play or irregularities, there should be a recount, like in the Democratic Party primary. Bernie Sanders should have been the beneficiary of a recount and a potential challenge because of the stripping of voter rolls in Brooklyn, the failure to count hundreds of thousands of votes in California, that the Democratic, this is about holding the Democratic Party accountable to the same standard that we're looking at in 3 Republican victory states. The reason we're looking in those states is because you want to look at states that meet the criteria for high potential, high likelihood for having had error. And that means they're razor-thin margins. The results went the opposite of what was anticipated, and they have some kind of a built-in vulnerability. And it happened that the 3 most significant states were those 3. We didn't know which way Michigan was going to go, but it turned out to go Republican. But if we have findings, then we have a case to go into many more states, including Democratic states.
Jill Stein, are you somewhat disconcerted by not having the full support of the Green Party, and particularly Jamu Baraka, your vice presidential candidate, a running mate, who said on CNN it's potentially, the recounts are potentially a dangerous move?
You know, the Green Party is a very, you got a lot of opinions, and a lot of people are very well informed and very passionate. And we don't often do things in the Green Party that we have uniform consensus on. So I think as this goes forward, that there will be more room for dialogue. And I think as we begin to see results that actually translate into a more secure voting system, that minds will change. The Greens, you know, are very focused on economic justice, racial justice, climate justice, you name it. And for many Greens, especially newer Greens, electoral integrity, it has not been a priority. So I think for many people, it's a learning experience and it's a dialogue. And I think it's, you know, it's great that many people are continuing to do the other work, which is very important for us to continue.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us, Dr. Jill Stein, the 2016 and 2012 presidential nominee of the Green Party, leading the effort for an election recount in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Later in the show, we'll be speaking with cybersecurity researcher Bruce Schneier on why our voting system is vulnerable to hackers. But first, Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig will join us to talk about why he feels the Electoral College should choose Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. We'll be back with him in a minute.
Speaks to you.
Lonely World by Moses Sumney. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, and a shout-out to the students who are watching Democracy Now! Today in studio from Sharpton High School in Houston, Texas, and the Borough of Manhattan Community College, BMCC, here in New York City. Well, as we continue to talk about the U.S. election system, we turn now to Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig, who sparked debate over the issue of the Electoral College with his recent op-ed published in the Washington Post, headlined, "The Constitution Lets the Electoral College choose the winner. They should choose Clinton." Lessig writes, electors were to apply, in Hamilton's words, a judicious combination of all the reasons and inducements which were proper to govern their choice, and then decide. The Constitution says nothing about winner take all. It says nothing to suggest that electors' freedom should be constrained in any way. Instead, their wisdom about whether to overrule the people or not was to be free of political control, yet guided by democratic values. They were to be citizens exercising judgment, not cogs turning a wheel, unquote. The electors will meet on December 19th. Those are the words of Lawrence Lessig, writing in the Washington Post. He's joining us now. Lawrence Lessig, Harvard Law professor who briefly ran for the Democratic nomination for president in 2015, also the author of Republic Lost, How Money Corrupts Congress and a Plan to Stop It. Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us from Amsterdam, where you are right now. Well, why don't you lay out what you're calling for?
Well, as you described in summarizing the op-ed, the framers meant for the electors to exercise judgment. And it's a judgment which is really asking the question, should we overrule what the people have done? Now, there are some cases where I think they plainly should overrule what the people have done. For example, if the candidate is a crazy person, or if it turns out not to be qualified, or is a criminal, those would be good reasons to overrule what the people have done. But in this case, there's no reason for the electors to overrule the popular choice. The popular choice, by more than 2 million votes, is a completely qualified candidate for president, and the principle that should be a fundamental principle in our democracy, the principle of one person, one vote, says that the vote of every American should count equally, and if it does, Hillary Clinton should be the president of the United States.
So explain the Electoral College. Explain how it works, what electors will be doing on December 19th, and what you feel they should do.
Well, the Electoral College is a group of electors selected in the states who will meet in the states on December 19th and cast their ballots for who they believe should be president and who they believe should be vice president. And then those ballots get transmitted to Washington, and that they're opened in Washington in the Senate, and the results are read. Now, their decision that they exercise on December 19th is a decision of judgment. They were to be people who reflected on all the issues presented and have to make a decision. And that decision, I think, should be guided by the principles we should all take as uncontested. And that uncontested principle that I've advanced, the idea that votes should count equally, that everybody's vote should count equally in the United States, should have an overwhelming influence on their decision. And what they should do, in my view, is to say, state laws that tell me I have to vote for the winner, even though the quote, loser might have gotten 48% of the vote, shouldn't constrain me so that I have to go against this fundamental idea of equality. So I think that they should vote in a way that respects the actual winner in this election and make Hillary Clinton the next president.
What does it mean for the electors not to vote the way their state did, but the way the nation did? What are the rules?
Well, first of all, they don't have to vote the way the nation did necessarily. They could vote the way a significant proportion of their state did. Look, in Michigan, if Donald Trump is found to be the winner by some 10,000 votes out of 4.5 million cast, what the Michigan electors could say is, okay, I'm going to vote in a way that reflects Michigan. So half of Michigan was essentially for Clinton, half was essentially for Trump, maybe one more for Trump than for Clinton. That division goes against the laws of the state of Michigan that say they have to allocate the electors' vote to the winner, all the electors' votes to the winner. But my point is, and this is now increasingly uncontested among constitutional scholars, winner take all does not exist in the Constitution. It's a restriction imposed on the electors by the states. And if you think that the electors are, as Hamilton described them, people who are supposed to exercise judgment, that restriction is the flaw which ought to be resisted. So they should vote reflecting the votes of the people in their state. And if they did, I think that would be enough to make it so that the winner in January will be Hillary Clinton.
I interviewed Bernie Sanders on Monday night in Philadelphia, and I asked him about the Electoral College.
No, I think that's an archaic concept. I think nobody voted for the electors. 99.9% of the people don't even know who the electors are. They voted for Hillary Clinton, they voted for Donald Trump, and their obligation is to support the candidate that the people in the state voted for.
So he says they got to vote for the way their state went. Lawrence Lessig.
Yeah, well, I think the archaic idea is actually winner take all, because the principle of one person, one vote is a principle that was introduced as a fundamental principle in American law in 1962. Long after states had moved to one person, one vote. And exactly 50 years ago, the state of Delaware went to the Supreme Court and they said, look, winner take all seems to us to be inconsistent with your principle of one person, one vote. So which should stand and which should fall? And the Supreme Court ducked that issue. So I think that if you believe in the fundamental principle of equality, we shouldn't be giving so much deference to an idea of winner take all that was born at the time slavery reigned in the United States. We ought to be respecting the principle of equality. And under the principle of equality, we should get as close to respecting equal votes of every citizen as we can, given our constitutional structure. And I think if we did that, then the will of the people would not be overturned. It's only happened twice before. This is the point that people miss. Only twice has the Electoral College voted against a candidate who had won the popular vote. Once in 1888, when Grover Cleveland had the election stolen from him by Tammany Hall in New York, and once in 2000, where most people think the election was essentially a tie, and they went with the Electoral College. Those two precedents should not be enough to overwhelm the fundamental precedent of equality that ought to define how our democratic system works. And that principle says Hillary Clinton is our president.
Professor Lessig, your column prompted a number of rebuttals. One was that electors are simply unvetted party loyalists who are ill-equipped to make independent judgments. Your response?
Well, it's true. We don't know who they are. But I'm not asking them to make a judgment based on their own preferences. I'm asking them to recognize a principle that should be common to all of us. And that principle is the principle of equality. Now, if it turned out that the candidate was insane or the candidate was a criminal, we'd also be calling on them, these people we don't know, to make a judgment, as the framers of the Constitution expected they would, not to ratify the choice of the people for that candidate. So the Electoral College is a project that calls on their judgment. If we don't like it, we can talk about how to eliminate it. I'm not quite convinced we should eliminate it completely. I think it's important to have a final check be somebody other than the Supreme Court. But given that it's there, we should take it seriously. And taking it seriously says they should exercise their judgment according to the moral values, the principles that are part of our constitutional tradition today. And those principles say equality.
Donald Trump tweeted, albeit in 2012, the Electoral College is a disaster for a democracy. He's not saying the same thing today, but do you agree?
Well, I think in a case that he was talking about, he expected that Barack Obama was going to lose the popular vote but win in the Electoral College. And he said it was a disaster for democracy if that would happen. And I agree with him. Absolutely, it's a disaster for democracy. But that's just one on a long list of things that Donald Trump has said that at one point I agreed with him, and then he changed his view, and now I don't agree with him anymore. But I think it's a lot of fun to repeat those, and I just blogged about a bunch of these where he was saying that we ought to have a revolution if the popular voice, the popular choice is not elected as president. Well, I'd rather just have 37 electors vote for Hillary Clinton than have a revolution. But either way, I think the popular choice in this case ought to be president of the United States.
Lawrence Lessig, there's also the concern, since the election was held under the current electoral system, that to change it after the fact would be improper. Your response?
I agree. It's improper, but I'm not changing anything, right? If the Constitution says they are supposed to exercise judgment, which is in fact what I think the right interpretation of their power is, then I'm just saying what are the values that ought to inform the judgment? The value of one person, one vote, the value of equality is a value that was given to us more than 50 years ago as a central part of our constitutional tradition. So under that principle, we ought to be applying the same standard today that I would have said we should have applied a year ago. We made a mistake in 2000 when we allowed that decision about who should be president, Bush v. Gore, to be decided by the Supreme Court, rather than raising this issue then. Because in that case, too, we should have said, look, this is the product of a radically unequal way of counting votes. The votes of people in California are a fraction of the weight of the votes of people in Wyoming or in other of these states. And so what we ought to be doing is looking at that inequality and saying, does it make sense? And if we adopted the rule that I'm saying, where the Electoral College basically looks at the results and says, is there a reason to disqualify the winner of the popular election, we would actually have presidential campaigns that did something more than just spend all their time in 10 states in the United States. We'd have presidential campaigns which were focused on the broad swath of Americans to convince them to support the candidate for president.
Finally, Professor Lessig, you're a Harvard law professor, and I want to ask you about a totally different issue. Donald Trump sparked controversy Tuesday when he made two unconstitutional proposals in a single tweet. He tweeted, "Nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail." Now, the Supreme Court has ruled twice that flag burning is protected under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has also ruled it's unconstitutional to strip people of citizenship for most crimes, including desertion. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren wrote in 1958, "The deprivation of citizenship is not a weapon that the government may use to express its displeasure at a citizen's conduct, however reprehensible that conduct may be." What are your thoughts, Professor Lessig?
Well, I think that this potentially loophole president is becoming more and more like Vladimir Putin every day, because those are exactly the rules in Russia. You can be thrown in jail. You can lose your citizenship in Russia, certainly. But it's absolutely unconstitutional to imagine either of those two penalties for exercising free speech. And my former boss, Justice Scalia, for whom I clerked, would be turning in his grave now to imagine a Republican candidate for president or a president-elect talking about doing something like throwing somebody in jail for flag burning. He joined the flag burning opinion, which said flag burning was a protected First Amendment expressive activity.
I want to thank you for joining us. Professor Lawrence Lessig. Professor Lawrence Lessig teaches at Harvard Law School, and he's the author of the book Republic Lost: How Money Corrupts Congress and a Plan to Stop It. We'll link to your op-ed in the Washington Post. The Constitution lets the Electoral College choose the winner. They should choose Clinton. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to talk hacking with Bruce Schneier. Stay with us.
Throwing sticks, politics, nights on the wire. Everybody wants to get by. It's a test of the times, a test of my rights. It's on, pretty lady. Born to be angry, grip of the vice. Click on the trigger, girl. Sip on ice. It's about time. Best to right. You better know. Let's go, baby, go. It's about time. I'm on a tightrope. Don't go.
It's About Time by Young the Giant. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. American elections will be hacked. That's the title of a recent op-ed in the New York Times by our next guest, the leading cybersecurity and privacy researcher, Bruce Schneier. He warns, quote, "Our newly computerized voting systems are vulnerable to attack by both individual hackers and government-sponsored cyber warriors. It's only a matter of time before such an attack happens." Bruce Schneier is a security technologist, fellow at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society, author of the book Data and Goliath: The Hidden Battles to Collect Your Data and Control Your World. Bruce, welcome back to Democracy Now! Talk about your concerns today in this aftermath of the 2016 election.
A lot of our voting machines are basically computers, and especially computers without any paper audit trail are vulnerable to hacking and errors in ways that can't be corrected. And my worry is that we're going to have an election where there is credible evidence of a hack, and we're literally not going to know the actual results and have no way to figure it out. And that right now will be a disaster for our system.
So you said your concern is we're going to have an election. Do you think we had one?
My guess is no. It's sort of interesting to watch these three states. There's research that shows
you mean Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan?
Yeah, those three states. So there are anomalies in the results that seem to correlate with voting machine type. Now, that is a red flag for hacking and something we should look at, and we should definitely research this. My guess is it isn't. My guess is there's some confounding variable that the machine type is correlated to demographic in some way. But we don't actually know until we do the research. My worry right now is the recount. That process was designed decades ago, and it meant counting the ballots slower and more carefully. And it didn't mean looking at the voting machines for forensic evidence of hacking. So I'm not convinced that even after this recount, we're going to know more.
I want to turn to comments by Alex Halderman, director of University of Michigan Center for Computer Security and Society and one of the leading computer scientists and election lawyers calling for a recount. He indicated a hack of the vote was, quote, plausible, but went on to emphasize, quote, the only way to know whether a cyber attack changed the result is to closely examine the available physical evidence, paper ballots, and voting equipment in critical states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Your thoughts?
So he's 100% correct. That's the only way to know. And when there are paper ballots, if it's an optical scan machine where you vote on paper and that paper ballot is your backup, you can look at that paper, and that will give you the actual vote. In states that don't have that are just touchscreen machines like ATM machines, there's going to be really no way to figure out original voter intent. There, the only thing you can do is forensically analyze the machines, the network, and while that may lead to evidence of hacking, it won't tell you what the original votes are. Now, that process can take weeks. It can take months. It's not a process we're really ready for. We expect to know the winner now.
In Wisconsin, Clinton received 7% fewer votes in counties that relied on electronic voting machines compared with counties that used optical scanners and paper ballots. That was a piece in New York Magazine. Your thoughts?
So that's exactly correct. So that is the red flag that could indicate hacking. It could indicate other things, too. There was a complex post on 538.com that looked at that data and had a theory that it was demographics that was the deciding factor and not hacking. That could be true, too. So we have a problem right here. Right? Elections serve two purposes. The first is to choose the winner, but the second is to convince the loser. The losing side has to believe the election is fair, otherwise it's not legitimate. Things like this delegitimize the election, and that's why we need to investigate them and come up with the actual answer. And if there was hacking, we need to know about it. If there wasn't, we need to know about it.
I want to turn.
Stein made a really important point. There needs to be rules in place beforehand, because now, when the election is over, battle lines are drawn. It's Trump versus Clinton, and you're going to pick the process that'll have your side win. Rewind this a month, and it'd be really easy to come up with a set of rules that everyone agrees on. So we need those rules in place before we vote when we don't know which way the hacking or the demographics or the miscount might go.
I want to turn to a report produced by Rolling Stone investigative reporter Greg Palast. He was in Ohio just before the election. Palast spoke to election law attorney Bob Fitrakis about problems with the voting machines. We hear first from Fitrakis.
Well, machines now can actually take a ballot image in the sequence of every single one cast to eliminate fraud if somebody tampers with the paper ballots.
There's only one problem.
They've decided to turn off the security.
Election law attorney Robert Fitrakis represents Republicans and Democrats. He just discovered that the photo image and audit protection functions have literally been shut off.
So they bought state-of-the-art equipment and turned off the security.
That's Bob Fitrakis in Greg Palast' piece. Bruce Schneier, your response.
So it's hard to know how bad that is. if they're photographing the paper and the paper still exists, then we're okay. And the photograph is just a backup of the paper. If the paper is destroyed, then that's an absolute disaster. So without knowing more, I can't tell. But something else is brought up in this that's real important, that we can't lose sight of, I think, the real issue here, which is not the hacking in those 3 states, but the voter suppression everywhere. And whether it is voter ID requirements or closing polling places in poor neighborhoods or reducing early voting or purging voter rolls, there's a concerted effort in the United States to deny people the right to vote. I think that's the real issue. And that has probably caused a lot more discrepancy in the vote versus the will of the people than machines, even though machines can be a disaster.
I want to turn to Michael Isikoff. We spoke to him, chief investigative reporter for Yahoo News, looking at reports that hackers outside the U.S. infiltrated 2 state election databases. This is what he had to say about vulnerabilities in the voting infrastructure here.
In 40 states, we have optical scan voting in which there are backup of paper ballots, so there's a safety net there. But there are points of vulnerability. In 6 states and parts of 4 others, including Pennsylvania, a crucial swing state, there are electronic voting machines that are vulnerable, that could be tampered with. There's internet voting for overseas ballots and military ballots in 33 states, so that's another point of vulnerability.
That's Michael Isikoff, Bruce Schneier.
He's exactly correct. There's really 3 areas of vulnerability we have to worry about. The first is the voting rolls. If someone could hack those rolls and change them or delete them, they could cause real problems on Election Day. The second is the machines. And yes, optical scan machines are the most secure and the safest. And it's a paper ballot that you fill in ovals, and it's processed, and the paper is your backup. The third area of vulnerability is the tabulation of the counting. And we don't talk about that much, but after everyone votes, there's a system of consolidating all of those results from every machine higher and higher into a single state result. And there's vulnerability there. So yes, those 3 areas are all rife for hacking, not just from foreign powers, but from hackers everywhere. I mean, these aren't things that are only the purview of nation states. Our computer systems are so vulnerable that even amateurs can in some cases do it.
Bruce Schneier, we want to thank you for being with us, security technologist, fellow at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society. We'll link to your piece in the New York Times that's headlined, "American Elections Will Be Hacked." He's also author of Data and Goliath, The Hidden Battles to Collect Your Data and Control Your World. That does it for our broadcast. And we hope if you're in the area, you will join us Monday, December 5th at Riverside Church in New York City for our 20th anniversary celebration, featuring Harry Belafonte, Noam Chomsky, Patti Smith, Danny DeVito, Danny Glover, Tom Morello, Juan Gonzalez, and many more. You can visit DemocracyNow.org for details. And we have a job opening. Democracy Now! Is hiring a senior TV producer. We also are looking for interns and fellows. Go to DemocracyNow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkner, Min Shea, Carla Wills, Laura Gaddis, Dina Guzder, Sam Malkoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud. I'm Amy Goodman. Our website's DemocracyNow.org. Thanks so much for joining us.